Welcome to the Triage Method podcast with me, Gary McGowan, and my co-host, Mr. Patrick Farrell. What a treat this week for you guys and for me. We're together. It's probably the second or third podcast we've ever recorded together, but I'm in London, so having a nice time. Paddy has chosen to take the angle here, so he looks a lot larger than me. I'm actually 6'6", he's 6'5". But seriously, I look really short. I'm not actually this short, I promise.
You are. You're only like 5'11".
6 foot and a bit. Actually.
That's what everyone who's 5'11".
says. I'm actually not one of those. I think I'm 183.2 centimeters, which gives me 0.7 of a centimeter above the 6 foot.
All right. I just tell everyone I'm 6'2" because then everyone freaks out. Like, oh, you're not 6'2". You must be at least like a 6'8". Because everyone wants to be fucking 6 foot for some odd arbitrary reason. But anyway, we're not here to talk about that shit. We are here to basically, I suppose, wrap up this training series.
Yes.
And the way we're going to do that is by going through our goals, our program, all this stuff. We might even do an episode after this episode, where we go through like health stuff. We'll keep this episode strictly, training related, and then sorry, I have a cough or something. Can't taste as well. It's weird. So we will go through the training stuff in this episode, and then in the next episode we might go through health stuff. We'll plan out, see what the story is, see what we got covered here. But I basically want to wrap up the training series and give you not necessarily a blow by blow of like this is how you go through everything, because look, we have an education portal where we talk about this stuff. We coach people, like there's a lot that goes into this, right? But I want to give you some sort of overview so that you can go away from everything we have discussed in the last few episodes and go, okay, this is what they've been talking about. This is how they're applying it in a kind of overview, top-down type of way. How can you take from that and then start applying this stuff to your program design? So the first thing we need to cover today is goals, because you remember back in this series, the first thing we covered was goal setting, right? So you need to have your goals clear. You need to be very precise in terms of what are you actually trying to achieve. Like you can't just say, oh, I'm trying to be bigger. Like, yeah, that is a goal, but we need to be specific with that. What does that actually mean? Are you going to be happy if you're bigger and you, weigh 10 kilos of fat extra? That's bigger. You got bigger, but is that what you were looking for, right? Were you looking for 2 kilos of muscle extra, right? Like, what are we actually aiming towards? So we're going to go through our goals. And then we're going to get into a little bit of designing the basis or the basics of our actual program, like how we're kind of setting things up, from like resistance training, cardiovascular training, and then obviously as applies to both of us, as you'll find out, like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu training, right? So that's how we're going to go through it. There's a few other things that we have to cover at the end of that. We might not get to them. We might, depends on how long this takes. But we want to talk about like assessing the outcomes, like how do we know we're actually getting better at like what we're trying to do, right? So to start it off, Gary, what are your goals with training, with, we'll call it the fitness side of health and fitness?
Yeah, so I guess my primary goal currently is to get better at jiu-jitsu. And I know that that's not something that may be immediately relatable to a lot of listeners, but it is something that you can get a lot of, I guess, transferable training principles and understanding from. Because effectively, I'm in the position where I think a lot of other people would be, where I'm not necessarily training to maximize my strength and muscle. Like, yes.
Wait, we should probably just preface this or preface it. I never know which way to say it. But you also have about 10 years of lifting experience already. I've about 15. So I'm still this skinny after 15 years. You're still this skinny after 10 years. Yep. So obviously we're resistance training non-responders. So especially you.
Yeah.
But that is, the context we're going into this with.
Yeah. And I think like when it's very easy to get kind of lost in the world of fitness, because I came into fitness and still consume a lot of content related to bodybuilding, powerlifting, people who basically specialize in strength training of some sorts. And that's still what I'm very interested in, but it's not necessarily my own goal as such, So I would still, go on Instagram and look at people like, Jordan Peters or other people who are ridiculously big and strong and think, oh, that's really impressive. But it's not necessarily my own goal.
It's motivating, but it's not like the thing you want to do.
Exactly. And one of the things that I found recently, probably in the last year, is that like when I look at myself, compared to when I look at my goal and I say, right, I want to get better at jujitsu. And I think, okay, how strong do I need to be? I actually end up with the conclusion that I'm actually really strong. And that sounds silly because like I don't have particularly impressive numbers in that realm of strength training. But when you compare my level of strength to that of other jiu-jitsu athletes around my weight or in my club, like I definitely have a surplus of strength, like would be in the higher percentiles there. Of course, you're going to find the odd person who's stronger, but it's quite rare, you know. So and it's not like I have any crazy numbers. Like I think, you know, I've box squatted, which doesn't really count, you know, 200 kilos or so. My heaviest kind of full squat might have been around the 160 to 170 range, something around there. So not particularly impressive, but definitely a far above and beyond what you would require for jiu-jitsu. You know, it's not like you need that much lower body strength. And then obviously the upper body, similar story. Like I can, you know, get close to 1.5 times body weight bench, which is a fairly decent standard. And then I look towards my training and think, how much should I actually be lifting? You know, should I be lifting 6 times a week like some of my bodybuilding friends? You know, no.
Or what you potentially used to do.
Yeah, what I used to do. Not really. And sometimes I end up with this kind of feeling of guilt that, oh, you know, I only lifted 2 or 3 times this week. Is that enough? But the reality is that it is, because it's more than enough for me to be able to maintain what I have and maybe make some incremental progress forward in some areas of strength. So if I was to kind of use my bar of my standard as that way in which I used to train, it wouldn't be a fair comparison because it's just not the same situation. So for me, it then causes me to ask the question, what other components of fitness are there? You know, so let's say I've got enough strength and muscle for my size within my sport. Same for a lot of field sports athletes. They'll do a lot of strength training and they might already be in a position where getting any stronger isn't going to benefit their sport. So then it would cause me to ask, you know, what about my fitness? You know, are there areas of my cardiorespiratory fitness which I could improve on? And on average, again, I would say that my level of cardio in the aerobic domain would be above average, more than I would require really for my level. You know, it's still beneficial to have more, especially in jiu-jitsu, because effectively the fitter you are, the easier it is to carry out the skills that you've learned in a more fatigued state. And there's a nice interplay there between the skill that you've developed and the fitness that you have. If you've got more skill, then it's, you know, you've just got a higher level of reserve, even if you are super fatigued. But if you're someone like me who's only been training jiu-jitsu for a few years, then obviously you've only got so much skill. Like you don't have the level of a black belt, obviously. So I end up using a bit more of my fitness probably if I'm competing, if I'm training with some of those higher level skill competitors. So I think fitness is something that you can probably take to a higher level. And by fitness, I mean cardiorespiratory fitness. You can take that to a higher level and still benefit. So that's something that I would continue to try and exploit. But one thing that I guess maybe I wouldn't have as high level of would be something like anaerobic fitness, because that's something that can decay quite quickly. It's something that, you know, it's a bit harder to gauge where you're at. But I think that doing things like intervals, lactic intervals, if you will, that's something I could still probably improve on. It's probably a little bit below the level of my baseline aerobic fitness. So there's some of the primary fitness characteristics that I would think about. And obviously, there's no point in discussing the details of jiu-jitsu training. You know, I show up to class, I do what the coach teaches, I go to open mats and I work on things that I want to work on, and the gains come, you know, because I'm at that stage in jiu-jitsu where I'm effectively the newbie lifter. You know, when you're early on in your lifting career, you're going into each session and you're lifting more weight, you know, and you're expecting week to week, month to month to continuously see more weight on the bar. That's where I'm at with jiu-jitsu, where I would expect that each week, each month, I'm learning something new. There's something I'm getting better at. There's weaknesses I'm addressing, and that will probably continue for a number of years yet. that will slow down eventually. But for now, I'm in that kind of newbie phase. So I don't have to think too much about the specifics, show up, put in the work, and be consistent. And that's probably enough there. So for me, that's the basis of my training is showing up to jiu-jitsu and doing those sessions maybe somewhere between 4 and 6 times per week, depending on the week, probably 4 or 5 on average. And then getting in my resistance training 2 to 3 times per week, sometimes as many as 4, sometimes as little as 1, depending on the week.
Yeah, and we'll talk through like ideal, like what's the best, you know, training scenario for you when we get to the actual like program design, let's say. What
are your goals?
Well, they're very similar. I come from a background of boxing, so like when I got into training, like you said, you got into it purely for the bodybuilding side of things. Like I kind of did because I wanted to be bigger. You know, I wanted to be stronger as well. So I came from a little bit of a different background, but again, coming with the context of like, oh, I used to box for like whatever, 10 years or something. It changes things a little bit in terms of my focus, like throughout the whole training process, whatever the 15 years that I've been resistance training, like I did always want to be somewhat athletic. Like it was something I always wanted to build upon. Now that might not have always been reflected in my actual program design, but as of right now, again, like I have 15 years or so of resistance training experience. I'm as strong as I've ever been, like even at heavier weights. I'm fit, I'm, you know, somewhat athletic. So my goals have somewhat changed because I don't think like realistically I'm going to gain 10 kilos extra of muscle or 20 kilos. Like it's not like I have a huge amount to gain. Like right now I weigh about 101, 102 kilos. And as we discussed at the start of the episode, like I'm like 195 centimeters. So like that's a relatively good weight, you know. However, my goals are to actually gain a little bit more muscle, right? That's my actual primary goal. Because I'm at roughly, if I get lean now, right? If I get like really lean, I'm probably somewhere around the 85, 87 kilo mark. And that's like, not like, you know, bodybuilding competitor lean, but that's like veins on my abs lean.
Yeah.
Right. So I kind of want to, there's a 92 kilo class in jiu-jitsu. So I'm kind of like, look, in my mind, I'm like, why don't I try to be as muscular and as lean as possible at that 92 kilo class? That's my kind of like top end, whatever goal, you know? So that's only realistically about another, let's say 5 kilos of actual muscle to put on, which is, you know, fair going, especially if you've been training for 15 years, right? So I have 5 kilos of muscle to gain. So I am 30 in January, right? So in my mind, I'm like, bro, we have until I'm about 35. That's when I'm like, look, if I haven't got to that big or whatever by 35, I'm just going to, you know, give up on that goal. That goal is just not achievable. It maybe becomes a very much a background goal, right? So that's the first thing I want people to be thinking about, that I have a time horizon right here now of the next 5 years and a bit, right? So by 35, I'm like, look, I want to weigh 92 kilos, absolutely fucking shredded out of my mind, right? So that's kind of the goal. Now, in that timeline, I'm like, look, I already know how to box. I already know, like, I have that skill. Gary, you have no fucking skills. So in my mind, I'm like, look, I don't actually have as much of an impetus to be really hyper-focused on jiu-jitsu, right? I already have we'll call it the mindset, if you will. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, I know what I need to focus on. Like, you're still learning that because you don't have the context of a different martial art. So I'm like, I know what I have to focus on to be better. And like right now in jiu-jitsu, it's just, I want to become untappable, right? I want to be like, frustrate the fuck out of people when they're trying to do anything to me, right? Because ultimately, I think that's the best approach. It's basically the Floyd Mayweather approach. Just fucking dance around, avoid getting, you know, touched even. And then when people get frustrated or tired, that's when you fucking strike, right? So that's my kind of approach to jiu-jitsu. I'm like, I want to be able to do all the submissions. Yeah, that's cool. That's obviously the point of it. But I want to become untappable. I want people to be like, you are the most fucking frustrating person to roll with because they can't get anything off. And I don't want to just be that in the case of like, oh, I just like lay there. You know, you see people like literally just like, obviously like I'm 100 whatever kilos. Like if I'm on top of you, even if you're in a similar weight class, like it's still 100 kilos laying on top of you. I don't want to be like that. I want to be actually like doing stuff, right? So my goals are to get better at jiu-jitsu, right? I want to be black belt. You know, I want to be a black belt, right? Because obviously that's a goal. You know, in jiu-jitsu, I'm a blue belt, obviously right now. So that's another, let's say, 8 to 10 years of training, right? So again, my time horizon for that is the next 10 years. I don't really care about whether I get good at it in the next 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, because ultimately I'm like, look, realistically, if I'm going to rely on any self-defense stuff, I'm going to box someone because I already have that skill, right? So I'm not going to be like, right, I'm going to pull guard here and like, do some shit. Now, obviously, very valuable skills, but you get the idea, right? So for me, this leaves me in a position where I have kind of two conflicting goals where I'm like, I want to get bigger, which isn't necessarily great for jiu-jitsu. Like you have to do a lot of like cardiovascular training to be good at jiu-jitsu in terms of like the actual jiu-jitsu sessions. Our skill-based sessions and cardiovascularly somewhat intensive depending on the actual session, right? So they're not really perfectly measurable goals. They kind of are, and we'll talk about that in a second, right? So my goals as of right now are to get bigger, and we'll probably talk about it in the next episode, I also want to live till I'm about 120, right? And tall people don't generally live as long as shorter people or normal height people, right? So that's already in my mind, that I want to be like, okay, well, I want to be at least the longest living tall person. So I want to, all of the stuff that I'm focusing on, all my goals are prefaced against the fact that I want to be healthy. So if we were to like rank my goals here, it basically goes, I want to be healthy. That's my number one goal. I want to be in the best health I possibly can be in, or at least maintain the best health that I possibly can, while also focusing on my secondary goal, which is to get a little bit bigger, right? And then my tertiary goal is to get better at jiu-jitsu. And that's the kind of rank order of that, right? And that's important to understand because, again, when we're goal setting, we want to know what's more important than the other. Like you could say, oh, I want to get stronger. I want to get fitter. I want to get better at jiu-jitsu. But if you don't know which is the most important for you, you're not going to make good training decisions. You're not going to make good program design decisions because you're going to be like, oh, I need to focus on this. I need to focus on that and this and that and that. And like, what happens if you're supposed to have, I don't know, 2 training sessions a day or 5 training sessions a week, and you're like, oh, actually something has come up, so I can't get those sessions. How do you prioritize which ones you're going to get rid of, right? Like you need to know that stuff, right? You need to have some sort of rank order of importance of your actual goals, right? So they would be my goals. I want to get as healthy as possible, or at least maintain as much health as possible. I want to, get bigger in the next, 5 years. And then I want to get to be a black belt in jiu-jitsu. And so they're the way my goals are kind of set out. And that's obviously going to be reflected in my actual program design. Now, as you mentioned earlier on, you're like, oh, well, you want to get fit and you want to get strong. But I'm in a very similar position where my strength, like it's actually above average for a lifter, right? So it's definitely above average for someone that's doing jiu-jitsu. Like I've never been at a strength deficit, even with like heavier lifters than me. Like it's just never been a problem, right? So I don't need to focus on that as much. However, to get bigger, generally you need to kind of get stronger, especially in that kind of, we'll say 8 to 15 or 6 to 15 rep range, right? So I need to get stronger, even though I have a strength surplus for my goals, right? Like being healthier, getting even stronger is probably not as beneficial for my health. It's probably not contributing to it. In fact, it's probably, taking away from it to some degree because I'm potentially opening myself up to injury by lifting these heavy weights. Like literally I go into the gym and I'm doing like RDLs with like 240 kilos. Like that's not exactly conducive to the best, I'll say, spinal health, like long-term, right? So that is something to be aware of, that I am compromising on that somehow in some ways, but I'm okay with that trade-off because it's not a huge trade-off in my eyes, right? Now, maybe when I'm 60 and I'm fucking hobbling around or something, I'd be like, really wish I fucking didn't do that. But ideally that won't happen, right? So I need to get stronger to facilitate my getting bigger goals, right? Fitness-wise, I need to get fitter to be better at jiu-jitsu. Like I don't want to ever be fatigued. Like right now I have relatively good cardiovascular fitness. Like I have a resting heart rate of like 45, which I would consider quite good. Like when I'm lean and doing a lot more aerobic activities, like it gets down to like 40. I know yours gets down to like 35.
Yeah, mine is just very responsive to changes in nutrition.
Yeah. So like I could focus more on fitness, but it's already, again, it's at a surplus. Even like you're saying, like more anaerobic fitness, and we'll talk about this in a second. Like in all of my resistance training sessions, I do some anaerobic conditioning at the end of those sessions because I don't need to really focus on it because I already have a good anaerobic fitness, again, potentially from my background in a somewhat anaerobic sport. And because I focus on it for the last at least 3 or 4 years. So for me, that's not a huge component. doing some cardiovascular conditioning in terms of anaerobic conditioning and in terms of aerobic conditioning does, however, contribute to my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu goals and my health goals. But it probably detracts a little bit from my getting fucking massive goals, right? So as you can see here, when you actually sit down and you go through your goals, there is a bit of a complex web that goes on, where we're kind of like, these are competing, these are synergistic, and like, how are you going to organize all of this to achieve all of these seemingly divergent goals, right? And that's what we want to go through in this kind of like program design stuff, right? So anyway, there are my goals. What's next, Gary? How do we design a program, right? So we're going for you. What's your ideal week? You go, okay, I have my goals. Someone has come to you. They give you their goals, exactly like you said. They're like, I want to get better at jiu-jitsu. That's my main goal. I have a strength surplus, but I want to at least maintain that. We'll call it gaintain. Anyone who says main gain, they're gone. Get out, leave.
Shocking.
Gaintain. Anyway, you want to at least gaintain, right? So how do you set up your training program, right? You also want to build a bit more anaerobic conditioning potentially, because you say there's a little bit of a deficit there. You could definitely be better at it. Like we could all be always.
Yeah.
There's always more to have. But how are you designing your program, and what's the ideal week for you, right? So obviously you said whatever 4 to 6 jiu-jitsu sessions. Again, obviously you have a busy schedule.
Yeah. Let's just say 4.
Yeah, we'll just say a baseline of 4 with a happy 5th.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, let's say around 4 sessions of jiu-jitsu per week. I think for me, if I can get 3 decent quality strength sessions, like I'm delighted. I think that's a really solid week for me. And the way I like to kind of set up my training, and I've probably deviated back towards this. I was doing a lot of to be honest, probably mainly full body sessions for a while. But I shifted back towards more of kind of a push-pull legs approach. So like basically just, chest, shoulders, triceps one day, then got your back work, biceps, maybe some posterior shoulder work, and then legs on the 3rd day. I find that to be the best approach for me personally, because it means I can just go in, focus on those sessions, get all that volume done to a high quality, and not worry about it then if I miss a full body session. Because that's what was happening, is that I do a full body session and then maybe I would have a jiu-jitsu session the next day, and those 2 kind of doses of whole body fatigue would basically compound each other. And then the next training day I was supposed to go in and lift weights again, and then I'd be thinking, I'm still not recovered from my squats, I don't know if I can deadlift, and so on. Whereas for me, with the push-pull legs approach, if I do my chest, my shoulders, my triceps on a Monday, and I do jiu-jitsu as well, yeah, my chest, shoulders, and triceps might be super fatigued still on Tuesday or Wednesday, but I can go in and I can do pull work fine. I can do my pull downs, I can do my rows, and it's no issue, or I can do my leg work and it's no issue. So that's probably something I've changed my mind on recently. I did think that full body approaches were a bit better, and they are for many people. But for me, I found that
they would work. Say, for example, if you had your week was Monday was a training day, Wednesday was a training day, Friday was a training day. You only did jiu-jitsu 3 times per week. You did resistance training on those same days, and you basically destroy your whole body on each of those days. But then you have 4 days of recovery. It can work quite well then.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is important to understand, because when we always talk about training, we always talk about the training side of things. We already talked about the recovery side of things, which is probably more important.
Yeah, like for me, my schedule is just super messy, very unpredictable. And there's often things that come up in the days that I have more time. Like, for example, I'm in London this weekend. I'm going to Tenerife in a few weeks. Then it's going to be Christmas. There's just a lot of things that kind of end up taking my weekends or my free days.
Yeah, like especially because you're doing medicine, you have a business to run. Like obviously, like I do a lot of the day-to-day stuff, but there's still stuff that I'm like, Gary, you need to do this today. You need to get in contact with this person today, or you need to do whatever it is today. Or we'll have, like, as we always do, have lots of projects going on in the background, and I'll be like, Gary, this needs to be completed this week or next week. So you would have had like, I have a training session planned here, that gets interrupted. Or in college or whatever, you might be like, oh no, actually they just decided to spring a test on us next week, or I have to stay later in this whatever, or there's an assignment due that I didn't get done on time, or whatever, something pops up.
Yeah. And I mean, like between Friday and Monday, like that's probably when I have the most time to train, but I also end up doing a lot more triage work, especially my coaching work. Like I do a lot of that between Friday and Monday. So as a result, like if I'm behind on that, I just have to prioritize that over my training. So as a result, the push-pull legs approach has been working quite well for me recently. And you might say, oh, but isn't a higher frequency approach potentially more optimal? And like, yes, potentially more optimal, but this isn't about optimal necessarily. It's about practical, because there's no point setting up the perfect 3-day full body program with higher frequencies if you end up missing sessions because of subsequent fatigue or recovery deficits. So for me, push pull legs approach, somewhere between 8 to 12 sets per muscle group per week, which again is on that lower end of the volume recommendations we typically provide. But remember, it's not necessarily my priority to push those things to the max. I think that's a really important point to impress upon, because what people always think when we say, oh, you want to be doing 10 to 20 sets per muscle group per week, maybe 15 to 25 if you're really putting an emphasis on a particular muscle group. People hear that and they hear 20 to 25. They don't hear the bottom end of the range.
And they also hear 20 to 25 for all
muscle groups. Yes. And the reality is that, especially if you're doing another sport, like aiming for the bottom end of the range, at least on most muscle groups, is probably wise. And the way that I would approach it then, if I was trying to, maybe, let's say I was really focusing on my chest, is I might push the remainder of the muscle groups down to that 8 to 12 range. And then I might do 15 sets per week for chest, something like that. So that works really well for me, given the limitations. And then from the cardio side of things, like jiu-jitsu obviously takes care of a lot of your cardio gains, which is fantastic. And I'm kind of deliberate enough with that too, where, for example, if we go to a standard jiu-jitsu class, what typically happens is you do all your drilling and then
you do a warm-up.
Yes.
Heart rate going.
Blue belt, bro. Well, no, to be fair, you need your purple belt first to skip warm-ups. But basically you do your warm-ups, then you'll do some drilling, then maybe some specific sparring, and then kind of open sparring, something like that. So the thing is, with the standard class, sparring is a little bit less, especially if you're in an advanced class with the color belts. It's a bit harder to take it easy. You can try and take it easy, but if you're getting smashed, you just have to, work hard, and especially
frustrate them. Become untappable.
Yeah, easier said than done with the black belts. But if you're with someone that's at your level, that you've maybe a bit of a rivalry with, or they're like your gauge of where you're at, you want to have a good role and you want to go hard. So they end up being very anaerobic, I guess. They're still heavily aerobic, but you're digging into more of those anaerobic components, and you're going to be more fatigued after those classes, especially if you're doing like 2-hour classes. So what I like to do then at the open mat sessions is I'll treat those as almost like my aerobic workouts. So I will, say before a roll, okay, I'm focusing on this. I'll take my first few nice and light, and maybe 1 or 2 hard rolls. But in general, I'm trying to pace myself. I'm trying to keep the heart rate down a bit, and I'm trying to focus on finding that balance between using my fitness and actually being able to preserve my skill, because that's effectively the purpose of those sessions. It's not necessarily hard sparring. So that's my kind of approach at the moment. And then I'll supplement that with some additional aerobic work, somewhere between maybe 1 to 2 hours per week, ideally. But if I get an hour, I'm doing pretty well, So that might be something like either steady state on the bike or another piece of cardio equipment, maybe going for a run, or I'll often, go for a long walk or a hike with my girlfriend, where my heart rate might be between 120 to 150, maybe, if we're going hiking. So that again would contribute to my overall aerobic load. If I had more time, and especially during the summer and stuff, and when I have time off, I would do more of that. But for now, it's just not practical. So that's kind of what I try to prioritize. Now, the anaerobic side of things, which absolutely improves your aerobic fitness too, I really like just hard, short intervals. So typically something between 20 and 40 seconds in duration, sometimes a little bit longer. I'll do those on the assault bike, or if I'm in a gym that has other pieces of equipment, I might do the rower, the ski erg, the bike erg, things like that. I'll very rarely do things like running sprints, because they just take so much out of you. If you're just trying to focus on anaerobic fitness rather than like actual running performance or field sports performance, you're just leaving yourself, at least for me, in a position where you're getting loads of extra hamstring and adductor soreness that's just unnecessary, really, for the benefits.
And also, like if you're doing jujitsu, like someone heel hooks you or
Yeah,
something,
and then
your ankle's a bit at you, like you can't really sprint with that. Whereas you can go on the fucking bike.
yeah,
You know?
and that's the beautiful thing about things like the assault bike, is that they're primarily concentric. So you're never taking like the landing, force absorption, eccentric loading that you're taking when you're doing running. And that's why, although an assault bike or an echo bike session might leave you feeling like absolute death, generally you actually wake up the next morning and you're like, oh, I actually have no muscle soreness.
Yeah, or even later
What's
that
up
day,
with
you
that?
kind of
Yeah.
feel like I actually feel better. Whereas
Yeah.
you go for a sprint and you're like, I still feel fatigued
Yeah.
after that.
And to be fair, like early on, that mightn't be the case, because there definitely is muscle damage that comes from concentric activity, and especially very metabolically demanding activity. When you're accumulating a lot of metabolites from that really fast energy substrate conversions and stuff, that does affect your muscle tissue, and it can lead to muscle soreness and muscle damage. But it's far less pronounced than eccentric activities like lifting or sprinting, etc. So that works really well for me, and I definitely get a lot of benefit from that. And I think if I can get 2 of those sessions done per week on top of everything else, fantastic. During the summer, I was doing probably up to 4 sessions of that per week, but it's very rough in terms of kind of systemic fatigue that you tend to develop. So if I did that, a really hard interval session like that in the morning, like my head is a bit fried, to be honest, for the next few hours. So that's not ideal if I'm going into the hospital, or I have to study, or I have triage work to prioritize, like in a deep work phase for 2 hours or something. So for me, if I get 2 interval sessions, I get an extra hour of steady state aerobic work on top of my jiu-jitsu. Then I got my 3 strength sessions. Like, I'm delighted if I get all that done.
So talk us through the week. Go like Monday to Sunday. How does that look?
Okay, so Monday, ideal
week.
Yeah, ideal week. Okay, so Monday I'll typically do a no-gi jiu-jitsu session. So that's
morning or the evening?
Evening. So that's a fixed session. Then I've got Tuesday, I've got gi jiu-jitsu evening. Wednesday, open mat. Thursday, gi jiu-jitsu. Friday, open mat again. Sometimes I'll go Saturday, but generally I'm picking 4 of those days. So a great week for me would be lifting on Monday morning, jiu-jitsu on Monday evening. Typically not Tuesday morning, because if I train in like Monday evening and I've done the morning before as well, I'll try to prioritize my sleep then to recover on the Tuesday, go back in for jiu-jitsu on Tuesday evening. Then Wednesday, let's say Wednesday morning, I lift and I'll do one of those interval sessions. And then Wednesday evening, I'll do my open mat. That finishes a bit early, which is nice because open mat's only on until about 6 o'clock. So I can prioritize work then on Wednesday evenings. Then Thursday, we're, sleeping in again. Not necessarily sleeping in, but not
till 5.
Yeah, till 5, obviously. But I won't generally train on a Thursday morning. Then I'll train Thursday evening again, and then maybe I'll lift Friday morning and do my actually I don't really lift on a Friday morning. I'll do the open mat on Friday evening, and then Saturday is when I'll get in my last strength session, typically some cardio,
and maybe a hike or something.
Yeah, maybe a hike or something. Sunday as well, I do some cardio as well. So yeah, it's typically Saturday and Sunday I'll like catch up on my cardio that I haven't done, because sometimes I end up caught for time and I don't have time for intervals or whatever. But yeah, I guess that's kind of the ideal week.
Splendid. Again, I'm not going to rehash a lot of the stuff that you brought up, a lot of the considerations, because again, mine are similar. However, as we've discussed, my goals do diverge from Gary's a little bit, and I focus a bit more on, we'll call it the muscle gain process. And as a result of that, I definitely have to prioritize resistance training, right? But for me, that looks like about 4 resistance training sessions per week. That's on a Monday, a Tuesday, a Thursday, and a Friday. And the way I do it is I do a lower body and then an upper body, because like Gary said, I just found like full body, you don't have a chance to actually recover certain like musculature, certain joint structures, whatever, right? And also in those sessions, I'm not doing these like big, hugely multi-joint exercises. Like I'm not doing a squat, because for example, a squat, that's just going to fatigue my shoulder girdle, fatigue my low back, fatigue my legs. It's basically a total body exercise. Even though I do stuff like hack squats and they do get similar muscle groups, it's just less fatiguing on all of the, we'll call it the secondary muscles and joint structures, right? Even though it actually potentially is more fatiguing on the actual structures that I want, such as my quads, right? So for me, that's the way I do it. I do a lower body and then an upper body the next day, right? And for me, that definitely works way better in terms of fatigue management, because then I know at least if I'm going to go into, like the way I do it is resistance training in the morning, 4 days per week, jiu-jitsu sessions in the evening, 4 evenings per week, all on the same days, right? So that'll be Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, right? That's for me, I would prefer to just basically get fucking smashed on those 4 days and then have the other days to recover with, right? Now on the Saturday, I do actually do some cardiovascular work, which we'll come back to. But for me, I need to do a little bit more volume because I am trying to gain muscle, right? I know I can get away with 6 sets per week for a muscle group if all I'm trying to do is slowly edge performance better. So I don't need to do a huge amount to maintain. However, I do find that I need to do a lot to really start pushing the boundaries with gaining. And as we've discussed, I have about 5 kilos to gain, and I've been training for 15 years. So it's not like it comes easy. So I kind of have to really prioritize that stuff, right? So for me, the muscles that I'm focusing are my back and my legs. And that's purely because I actually just think they have a greater potential for growth. I don't really care if my chest looks bigger. It doesn't matter to me.
It's already too big.
But anyway, I don't really care if it looks bigger. It's not necessarily an aesthetic thing that I'm going for. I'm looking for the most bang for my buck. And if I get my back bigger, that's potentially more beneficial for jiu-jitsu, and my legs getting bigger, potentially more beneficial for jiu-jitsu because I already have quite long legs. If I had these short stubby legs, then maybe that wouldn't be beneficial for jiu-jitsu. But the fact that I have long legs, getting them a little bit bigger, making triangles a little bit tighter, that kind of stuff, it makes sense. And obviously, I would like to grow some calves. That would be, a lifetime achievement.
Unlikely.
It is unlikely, but I do actually do about 16 sets for calves per week, right? So quite a lot of calf work, right? So for me, I'm kind of prioritizing my back and my legs, right? So they get more volume, and as a result of that, my chest, shoulders, they get a little bit less volume. Now, I would like my arms to get a little bit bigger because, again, that is kind of beneficial for jiu-jitsu. And definitely. Look, I'm not going to lie, I would like to have, some fucking 17-inch pipes just hanging out of my sleeve, right? That would be quite beneficial, quite ideal in my world.
Absolutely.
Right? So that's where they're the muscle groups that are getting a little bit more volume. The chest, the shoulders, and some of the other muscle groups, they're just not getting as much volume. Like my hamstrings, I'm not putting as much of an emphasis on them because I don't think they have that much of a potential for, massive growth, and also I feel I can get them quite effectively done with even just a secondary, fucking tension. I do some sort of squat variation. It's getting the hamstrings to some extent, if I do a hip hinge, it's really getting the glutes and the low back, but it touches on the hamstrings, So look, that's the way I'm kind of setting up my sessions. We're doing 4 resistance training sessions per week, and then we're doing 4 jiu-jitsu sessions per week. And like I said, I'm basically just doing whatever the instructor says to do. 3 of those sessions are I'm in Grissi Baja. So they have GB1, GB2, GB3. GB1 is for beginner sessions. GB2 is for call it colored belts, and then GB3 is black belt level. Now you're allowed to go to GB3 once you have a blue belt and above. It's not you're only allowed to be black belt, but the classes are relatively quite advanced. They just presume you have all the basics. They presume you have all the knowledge. It's not they're going and this is how we position our hand here or whatever. It's this is the grip we're getting. I presume you know how to get a grip, So. And then they'll go through an advanced move or whatever, right? So for me, I go to 2 GB3 classes, which are 90 minutes long, and they're on a Tuesday and a Thursday. So I know those training sessions are a little bit more intense. They're a little bit more cognitively demanding. And because they're 90 minutes long, we usually do, like I said, that general class structure. And then for the last 30 minutes, it's basically positional sparring and then sparring. Everyone in class basically spars everyone, for the last 30 minutes. It's here, sometimes it might be a 5-minute round, sometimes it might be a 10-minute round. I like the 10-minute rounds because I like to frustrate people because, again, as I said, that's my shtick. But that's the way the classes goes, right? On the Monday, I do a GB2, right? So it's a little bit less advanced, but it's still advanced enough, and it's still, whatever, challenging enough that I'm getting a good training stimulus. But it's not so challenging that I go into that Tuesday session and I'm feeling really fatigued, either in the morning session or the evening session. Wednesday, completely off for me. I was doing some cardio on that day previously, but I just found, for me at least, like psychologically, I just wasn't really as interested in training then on the Thursday, whereas if I skip that day, I don't do any training, I just get my steps in, so I'm still active. And I find that I'm like fucking ready to go for the Thursday session. I'm like, right, I actually want to train, rather than being like, oh, here's this other thing on my schedule, which is a really important thing to understand, that even though we're talking a lot of time about like physiology, like what's the physiological response to this in terms of like, how do your muscles respond? How does your fucking nervous system respond? Like the nervous system response does actually affect like the psychology, right? And I want to go into a training session and want to train. I don't want to go into a training session and be like, I'm just kind of like punching my ticket, just kind of really just lackadaisically ticking the boxes, right? Sometimes you have to do that. Sometimes you're just in a fucking rut with training and you just have to, stay ticking the boxes, stay keeping the groove, stay doing whatever. But for me, I know if I just give myself a break in between those, sessions, basically have Wednesday off, I go into that Thursday session, I'm like, let's fucking smash this, right? And I'm also a little bit more recovered for that lower body session, which is also the day that I do RDLs, which is probably my most fatiguing exercise. Excuse me. Because again, it's one of those exercises that gets fucking everything up. Like literally, I feel that when I like do enough volume on them and do enough like intensity, like I feel it from the tops of my trap all the way down to like the back of my kneecap, so I'm like, I know I'm getting a good training stimulus with that. It's not just like joint fatigue or whatever, right? I do also do them banded, so it's a little bit more tension. It's about 100 kilos extra at the top of tension, so I do like whatever 240 for 8, so it's about 340 at the top, which is fucking like, it's pretty ridiculous, but that's the fucking strength curve of the exercise. You're able to do that, right? But it is quite fatiguing, so I know that Thursday session that I do, which I said was a 90-minute session, it's one of those GB3 sessions. First of all, on the resistance training session, I keep the volume just a little bit lower. And that's not by virtue of like doing less sets or less reps or whatever. I just choose exercises that I know are a little bit less load intensive. Like I'm not going to do like fucking heavy RDLs into heavy good mornings into fucking whatever else. Like I'm choosing a little bit lighter exercises as a result of that. Still feeling the muscles work, still getting a good training stimulus, but it's not like lifting fucking tons, right? So that Thursday session is probably my worst session in terms of fatigue. The Thursday night jiu-jitsu session, and like sometimes I will notice that, because I'll be like, rolling, like currently the guys that I roll against are all like either the same weight as me or heavier than me, which is good because you have to really focus on technique then. But I'll know that like if I wasn't as fatigued, especially like my abs will get fatigued from doing the RDLs or whatever, like I'll know, I'll be like, oh, like I don't have that extra little like punch up to get like fucking, I don't know, into a position because I know I'm a little bit fatigued, right? Especially if we do a lot of conditioning at the start of the class, which sometimes you might do, you might be like, right, we're doing like position specific conditioning, like we might be doing like spider guard and you're doing like weaving the legs in and out or something like that. And I'm like, I'm feeling my abs a bit more than I would ideally like to. But anyway, so the Friday session, then the Friday is a fatigue day. Like I know I'm a bit more fatigued because I did that really hard session and then I did a really hard jiu-jitsu session as well. So for that day, I'm doing an upper body session, but I'm not focusing on the heavier lifts, right? That was basically done on the Tuesday, the upper body session. And like I would say, for example, I would focus on chest and back on that Tuesday session. Whereas on the Thursday session, or sorry, the Friday session, I'm focusing on upper body again, but I'm focusing more on like shoulders and back, because shoulders are, you just go lighter on them. You're just not able to lift as heavy. And even though I'll do something like some sort of like incline press, which is still like chest, like I just categorize shoulders and chest all together because they basically get worked in the same exercises. But anyway, I will do those kind of together, the shoulders and back, because it's a little bit lighter. It's a little bit easier to do. It's a little bit less cognitively demanding. And again, I can still get a good stimulus from that. And then that Friday jiu-jitsu session is a GB1. So it's basically just the fundamentals, the basics. It's a relatively easy class. It's a nice way to just close out the week, i.e., usually I'll be the demonstrator with the instructor who like, goes through the things. So I feel I can get a better grasp because I'm kind of anticipating like, what is he going to ask me to do in this, or like I'm showing moves. So it's good from the perspective of, thinking jujitsu, rather than just being like, I'll just go to class and do whatever they tell me to do. I'm like, no, actually I need to think a little bit, And then on the Saturday, I'll do some cardiovascular conditioning, and this purely aerobic, because at the end of my resistance training sessions on those 4 days, I will do some anaerobic conditioning. And for me, that usually looks like on the lower body days, I'll do the assault bike. And then on the upper body days, I will do the rower, right? So I alternate between the two of those, even though they basically both get your upper body and your lower body. It's not that fatiguing for me, at least. And if anything, it just contributes a little bit to some hypertrophic stimulus. So that's the way it works for me. And for those, I'll generally do some sort of like hard, either alactic or lactic conditioning. So either like, below 10 seconds or, we'll say 20 to 30 seconds. And then I'll give myself, quasi complete rest. So I'll do like 10 seconds on and 50 seconds off. And that 50 seconds off is active rest. So I'll just like, if I'm on the rower, I'll just, keep lazily like pulling it. Now, ideally you would like 2 to 3 minutes for like full rest, full ability to go ham on it again. But for me, I'm like, that's enough to give me 90% back to where I want to be, right? So, and if I get better aerobic conditioning, potentially I could even get better, right? So that's the way that goes for me. And again, that gets me nicely done anaerobically, and well, anaerobic is not, alactic is not anaerobic, but you get the idea, right? And then on the Saturday session, I'll do like 60 to 90 minutes of just aerobic cardio, and I'll do whatever 120 to 150 beats per minute. That's just the target heart rate zone. And what I'll generally do is just jump on the cross trainer and then load up a jiu-jitsu video, like an instructional or something. I don't know, I'm going through like a Danaher instructional at the moment, and I just watch that for the 90 minutes. So I could go to jiu-jitsu class, but I find I am way too fatigued. If I was competing and I was like, I'm really going for competing, I probably would swap that one out and do an open mat and just use it as like some sort of like competition class, and just be like, right, I'm going to like get better at competing in this class, even though I would kind of be fatigued after those last 2 training sessions. But the Friday night session, I feel quite good waking up on a Saturday morning. But either way, I do 90 minutes, well, 60 to 90 minutes, just watch a video, just watch the instructional, take any mental notes that I need to, and then that's me. And then on those 2 rest days, like complete rest days that I have, the Wednesday and the Sunday, I basically just get my steps in. There's no formal exercise. I'll go for a walk. I kind of fast on those days. Like I'll do like intermittent fasting, purely just so I can focus on work in the morning and just be like, right, I don't have to think about getting my steps in, or I don't have to think about this, whatever else. So I can just be like, yes, I get to have a bigger meal on the fucking lunch, and that's it. I just focus on my steps.
Yeah. And one thing you said in there, I just want to pull back on for a minute, and that is a lot of the time when people set up some of their training sessions, they'll actually make them more fatiguing by making them more hype focused, listening to their really intense music. Whereas I think you made a very smart, deliberate decision on your aerobic day where you're actually listening to John Danaher, who probably keeps your heart rate down, puts you to sleep.
In fairness, I listen to it in like double speed, so he's a little bit faster.
Yeah. For those who don't get the reference, like John Danaher he's basically a jiu-jitsu coach, probably the best, if
a wizard,
one of the best, if not the best in the world. But he also has a PhD in philosophy. So
I don't think he finished his PhD, but he was doing a PhD.
Yes, he was doing his PhD in philosophy. No, I think he did finish it.
I don't think he did.
Anyway, basically, you get the idea that he's very philosophically minded. So he could be talking about like gripping the collar of the gi, and he could probably talk about it for 40 minutes, just talking about it all. But he's a very calm, soothing voice, while also having a tinge of this guy could murder my whole family.
Malevolence.
Yes, absolutely. You love to see it, really.
Really, yeah.
So yeah, good choice, Paddy.
So that's the basic bones of both our programs. And as you can see, that's how they diverge based on our different goals. Now, we could get into the volume, the intensity, and all that kind of stuff, but it's actually not that helpful, right? Even though we spent episodes talking about that stuff, it is specific. Like both of us, I can pretty much presume we work in the 6 to 15 rep range. Some of the exercises I'm doing in a higher rep range, and that's purely because I've stacked the machines, where I'm like, at the fucking limit of those machines, or they're like bicep work. Like I'm not going to do a fucking 6RM bicep curl, you know, my technique just fall apart. It'll just be like, you know, I'm throwing my elbow around and I'm not actually keeping it strict, right? So I'll just do a higher rep so I can keep it lighter so that I can keep my technique more standardized, even though you kind of would think it's a little bit opposite because you get more fatigue and you're like, well, I could really just focus for 6 quality reps, but the weight, you know, oftentimes there's too big of a jump between weights, you know, like you're doing like say a cable machine or a dumbbell, it's like there's a fixed next jump, you know, and if maybe you wanted like a half a kilo or something, and that would allow you to do your 6RM, but it's often not practical. And like, yeah, you could say, oh, you know, just find it, like get a pin stack or whatever, and you can add more weight and you can, you know, go ways around this. But I have 2 training sessions to do pretty much every day I train. I'm not going to spend an extra 15 minutes in the gym fiddling around with whatever. Like my resistance training session and my cardio session in those mornings in Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, they take an hour 15. That's it. You know, I'm done after that, right? And like, I'm not going to spend 2 hours in the gym. Like, yeah, you could argue that it's better for me because my goals are like hypertrophy and I can get more volume that way and whatever else. But it's just not beneficial for my overall recovery. And also, I have a business to run, you know? Like I get up early, go to the gym, do my gym session, and then I have at least a 10-hour workday to do in between the jiu-jitsu training session in the evening, you know? So recovery and time management has to be on point. Now, it is kind of ideal because where I live, my gym is literally 30 seconds.
Yeah, I only learned that, and it definitely surprised me. Like it's literally below his gash. So yeah. No excuse really not to.
It's quite ideal, you know. Yeah, exactly. Like I could literally, if I'm like getting bored, I could go way down and do more curls, right? So that's important. Now, we basically talked about, you know, our general program design. We could get into like specifics. Like, are there any like strength standards that you're like focusing on? There's not necessarily any for me because, as I said, like I'm at a surplus. If I wasn't, or not at a surplus, I'm at a surplus of strength. And if I wasn't, maybe there would be some strength standards that I'm like, I would like to hit this specific strength standard. Like if I had a new jiu-jitsu athlete coming in, they've never trained before, I'd like, yeah, I want you to hit roughly these numbers. Do you have any numbers off the top of your head that you're thinking of or that you're chasing yourself?
Yeah, I mean, like I've met basically, I think, all the strength standards that I think someone should try and fulfill. So that's why I'm not kind of too focused on it anymore. There's some that I'd like to push up another bit, but for me, like someone asked me this on Instagram the other day, and I think the numbers I cited would be like for someone who's, let's say, doing another sport, or they want to be strong enough that they've satisfied most of the benefits they're going to get from extra strength or muscle. I think if you can get, you know, above a double body weight deadlift, which isn't a very high standard, to be honest, like it's like you should be able to achieve that.
I think like a double body weight squat.
Yeah,
you'd be like, okay, decent level of strength.
And that, for that reason, I say, like, you know, I think if you can get like close to a double body weight squat, like you're flying it really.
Oh, man, yeah, you're like
you really
top
are.
Food chain.
Yeah, you're flying it then if you can get to there. Like I think, like if you look at like elite powerlifters or strongmen, you'll sometimes see that their squat is even greater than their deadlift, but that's something you'll only really see at higher levels, higher body weights. Like in general, people are going to be able to deadlift more than they can squat.
And that's generally also because they're not using like straps.
Yeah.
You know, like if they were to put on straps, which is the weak link for most people, which is the grip, all of a sudden their deadlift is better than their squat again, you know?
Yeah. And mine is significantly better, to be honest. I think the most I've deadlifted is something like 230 or 235 or something at a body weight of maybe mid 80s kilos. So like that's more than enough. Like I can't be saying, oh, I need to get my deadlift stronger for jiu-jitsu. Like that's just silly. So if you can get a double body weight deadlift, maybe 2 to 2.5, you know, if you want to be aggressive, close to a double body weight squat. I think if you can get a 1.5 times body weight bench, but even 1 to 1.5, you're grand, really. Overhead press, if you can get anywhere near 1 times body weight, like unreal. But that's probably a more aggressive standard. I think 0.75 to 1 times body weight is what you should be looking for.
I would say like 0.8, you're fucking good.
Yeah, you're doing good there. Some people just really struggle with that, especially like I have relatively long arms. Like you obviously have long arms. There's a lot of movement overhead, you know, with an overhead press, and that can be
mine is so much better if I like stop. Like, can't see it on the video. If I stop and like chin height, I'm like fucking 1 times body weight, 1.2 times body weight, fucking handy. I actually have to like bring it down to here. Like you can't really see it in the video, but my elbows have to tuck in before they can go back out. And it's just like knocks off like 50 kilos.
So yeah, if you're getting anywhere near that, like you're flying it. And to be honest, like people always ask as well, like when I say these things, like, oh, are they different for females? And they're actually not that different, assuming you're lean. Obviously, if you've got an excess of body fat, this
like if you correlate for
difficult.
or control for lean body mass.
Oh yeah, like they're fairly similar.
I would say women actually potentially have a greater propensity for strength in certain exercises at least.
What I would typically do if you're trying to look at this from a female perspective, I'd bring the bench and the overhead press down, and the squat and the deadlift standards relatively similar, you know. Like for example, in my book, like a 60 kilo female, this could be wrong, this is totally arbitrary, 60 kilo female is kind of akin to 75 to 80 kilo male. Like they're relatively equivalent if you look at average male heights, average female heights, and average levels of body fat between the two. Like they're kind of along a similar standard. So when I look at my own strength standards, I kind of view that as like, all right, would a 65 kilo female be able to lift around the same level proportionally? Like, yeah, you know, if you can get a double bodyweight deadlift at 60 kilos, that's 120 kilos. And I've had a lot of female clients over the years who've met that standard. So I don't think it's too far beyond.
And obviously we should also like caveat all of this that like there's no actual like required exercises.
No.
Like a deadlift might be fucking just woeful for you. You know, you might be actually way better with something like a rack pull, and you're like, this is how I'm going to actually get my strength standards achieved. And then you might have to change them slightly. Or like a squat, you might do better with a front squat, which again, you might have to change the actual standard. You might do better with like a safety bar squat, a hack squat, like, you know what I mean? Like these are just arbitrary. It's just because, you know, if you go anywhere in the world, you can probably do some sort of squat. You can probably do some sort of deadlift. Now, they might not have the actual equipment or whatever. Like it's actually pretty hard to do a squat if you don't have a squat rack. And unless you're going to do one of those, what are they called? Hack and Schmidt squat? No, they're not hack. They're
it is a German name, I think, isn't it?
Anyway, fucking, you're gonna just basically throw the barbell onto your back, hold the barbell up straight, and then squat under it.
You don't do all your squats like that, no?
I used to, yeah.
I do, no clips either.
Oh, of course, yeah. You have to do it really fast to get that up.
But yeah, look, I think if you're meeting those standards, like you're flying it. I do like as well putting in like chin up and push up standards, just because if you don't have equipment, you can still say, right, you know, can I meet these? And I think if you can do over 5 strict bodyweight chin ups as a female, like this is one of the areas where the standards are quite different. Over 5 bodyweight chin ups for a female, and somewhere between 10 and 15 strict bodyweight chin ups as a male, like you're doing pretty well. I think push ups, like I think push-ups should be easy enough for guys if you're fit. Like you should be able to do somewhere between.
Were they good for you when you were 16?
I said when you're fit. I wasn't able to do a push-up until I was 16. But yeah, I don't consider that to be very masculine. You know, I would say that that's very effeminate of me.
In your peak testosterone production?
No, my peak testosterone production is now. So I think you should be able to do at least 30 like strict push-ups. I think that's legit. And I don't mean like bouncing up and down. I mean strict lockout, like chest down to a fist at the bottom, like 30. If you can do over 15 for a female, again, legit, you know, and I know, you know, lots of girls who can do that. So yeah, if you're getting that, spot on. I think my fitness standards, I think this is a more difficult one, but I think if you can run a 10K in less than 50 minutes, spot on. But again, not everyone's into running, and some people are just prohibited because of injuries or niggles that they get and so on. And that's fine.
I prefer like a heart rate. Just if you can get your heart rate below 50, like you're fucking fit. If you can get your heart rate below 60, I'd be like, you're in a good position, you know, you're not gonna die.
Yeah, I mean, for most people, like that's spot on. Some people will just have naturally low heart rates and still be unfit as fuck, which is a different story. But also I like I set some assault bike standards as well. Like if you're a female and you can do a 20 cal assault, is that what I said? 20 cal assault bike less than 60 seconds. That seems really hard actually. 10 cal assault bike maybe less than 30 seconds as a female, and 20 cal assault bike less than 30 seconds as a male. Like that's legit, I think, because the difference with the assault bike there is like, obviously there's an anaerobic component to that, but the heavier you are, the greater force you're going to be able to output each time you press your leg down anyway. So you do have to,
gravity, like.
yeah, you do have to just make a bigger differentiation there between male and female. But yeah, they're all obviously totally arbitrary. And if you meet none of those and you're doing excellent at your sport, forget I said anything. You don't need to meet these things. They're just arbitrary, and people like those standards. And there's some good websites as well. I think it's strengthstandards.com or something like that. You can look at where you're at. And like what I say to my clients is like, try to get into the intermediate to advanced range on most of these lifts relative to your body weight, and you're flying it then. You don't need to be elite.
100%. So just two things I want to wrap this up with. First thing is, are you doing anything specifically for athleticism? Because this is something that people always talk about. Like, oh, you do a sport. Are you doing anything specific for athleticism? Are you doing any like box jumps? Are you doing any like push presses or anything like that? Anything specific? And then the second half of that is, are you doing anything specific for like flexibility, And I suppose, like, seeing as we did talk about it previously in the last, 2 or 3 podcasts, are you doing anything specifically for injury prevention other than just choosing good exercises that are going to strengthen the potential weak areas of the body?
Yeah. So like athleticism is something that's kind of difficult to quantify, but when people say it, I know what they mean. They mean the things that don't fit into standard conventional strength training. So it might be doing more high velocity strength work, power or explosiveness or plyometric work. And I do a little bit of that, but relatively sparingly. The way I look at that is, if I've taken care of all the other things I said I would do in the ideal training week, I might add in a bit of that. Some of the things I would do sometimes would be like an explosive step up or something like that. Typically it's like unilateral explosive leg work, because that is a bit more relevant for jiu-jitsu, especially if you're doing like wrestling and stuff. Sometimes, shooting and you have to be more explosive. So some of that stuff I'll put in every now and then, but it's not a high priority. For some sports, it can be a bit more of a priority. If you need to jump or sprint, really important that you're doing some higher velocity strength work and potentially reactive, like landing drills and stuff like that. But jiu-jitsu is primarily, once you're done with the wrestling, it's a ground activity. So you don't need to put too much emphasis on it.
Especially if you're in the gi, it's quite slow.
Yeah, absolutely. Like no gi, it is a faster pace. I do enjoy no gi. So I think but that again puts you somewhere on that spectrum of the kind of anaerobic / power strength activity. And when you're doing heavy strength work, you're training those systems that are going to allow you to be explosive already. It's just kind of adding the icing on the cake then by doing more high velocity strength work. So it can be useful for sure. I view it as the icing on the cake for me, especially because it's not really what I enjoy. I enjoy my kind of standard strength / bodybuilding type training.
I just get stronger, and that makes me faster.
Exactly. I mean, and that's kind of how it works. So for jiu-jitsu, I don't think it's a massive priority. I know you'll see a lot of like martial arts training in general that people put a heavy emphasis on that. But I think if you take care of your basic strength work and all the conditioning stuff that we mentioned first, I think you'll get more out of that then in the end. Because you have to think about it, like when you're trying to develop like power, as they say, what you're trying to do is basically like take the strength that you've got and make it faster. So now take the muscle and the strength that you've built and now be able to express that at higher velocities. But if you think about that, if you've got no strength in the first place, then you've got nothing to express. So deal with the strength first and then add on the high velocity stuff. I
always think of it just like the shot put, right?
Yeah.
Or like even just throwing something is easier. Like if I get you to throw a bowling ball, right? If you're barely able to hold that bowling ball, I don't care how fast you are, how fucking explosive you are, it's just going to fucking fall. It's just going to be like, boom, straight down, right? Whereas if that bowling ball feels like a fucking, a golf ball in your hand because you're so strong, you're going to be able to throw that further, faster, stronger, fucking everything, So get stronger, you get faster, byproduct. However, you do still have to train it.
Yeah.
You can't just be like, oh, I got stronger and I hope to get faster. Like you still have to actually try to move fast, right?
Absolutely.
But you can do that in jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, and I mean, I do have more of my field sports clients work on this kind of stuff, like where I'll do Like typically it'll be something like I'm not getting people really heavily into Olympic lifting. I know people often think that, oh, if I want to be athletic, I have to do the snatch and clean and jerk, but they're really complex exercises. So why not just
and
do?
it's also, they're actually not even that good exercises for triple extension, which is what they're trying to charge or trying to train.
Yeah, I much prefer getting people to do like taking those movements and breaking down their components so we can exploit the components of fitness we're trying to. So for example, a box squat at maybe 40 to 60% of your 1 rep max and performing that super explosively on the concentric, like I really like that. Things like jumping squats as well at lower percentages of 1 rep max can work quite well. Things like explosive push presses, they're all great options without having to go and spend months and years developing excellent Olympic lifting technique. So I like that sort of stuff. Now, from a flexibility perspective, I'm not as flexible as yourself, but I do have an above average level of flexibility, particularly for jiu-jitsu in terms of hip rotation, knee rotation, especially. Like I've got an abnormal amount of knee rotation, and my shoulders are quite flexible as well. So I tend to find it relatively easy to do things like inversions and, rotating my hip into different positions, which works really well for jiu-jitsu. So I haven't had to train it too much. It is something that I do think there's a bit of scope there that if I improved it, it could potentially improve some elements of my game. But the thing with flexibility is that in jiu-jitsu, at least, it sort of depends on the type of game that you're trying to play. So if you want to, do lots of rubber guard and kind of 10th planet style jiu-jitsu,
which I do.
Yeah, then and that's good for you because you've got like long legs and flexible legs, which is really annoying to deal with if someone's able to do that type of jiu-jitsu.
Choking people out with your shin bone, that's
that is beautiful. Epic. Whereas if you're like maybe from the Dagestani school where you're like more smash sambo type Khabib style jiu-jitsu, then you don't need to use as much flexibility
to do both.
Or just do both, yeah. But yeah, it depends what you're looking for. And for me, I do use my flexibility for sure. I think it's something that I could do with. I could benefit from improving on it further. But again, it's one of those things that when I look at the relative return on investment, it's not very high up there for me at the moment. If I change my game and find submissions where, I'm actually not able to execute this because of a deficit in flexibility, then I would work on that more. But for the moment, at least, not a high priority. I do some stretching. I'll typically do it like at the beginning of an open mat or something. I might take 10 minutes and just do some light stretching. Sometimes if I have extra time after a workout, I'll do some loaded stretching. But again, because of my time limitation at the moment, spending 30 minutes doing stretching it's not very rewarding for me.
I'm in the exact same position. I have a surplus of flexibility. I can do the splits both ways. It's not really a huge amount I need to focus on with flexibility. What I will do is like if I'm like sitting somewhere, I might like put my leg in a stretched position.
Yeah, I definitely do a lot of that.
Like just to kind of be like, right, let's hold this for a longer time. Or like like we were saying, I was in Paris yesterday. Like I'll be waiting for a bus or something or a train or fucking whatever. I'll just sit in a deep squat position.
Pistol squat, like yeah.
Well, I can do repeated reps of pistol squats. So yeah, I could do that. But like just sit in a squat position, stretch out, so something like that, like I suppose you could call that like flexibility work. But when I do like some prep work before each training session, like I've said it before, I have like Viking's disease, so I'll stretch that out just because I don't want to fucking have a claw for a hand. Well, it would be kind of cool, but I don't think it'd be great for like grip and stuff.
No.
So I don't really do a huge amount of flexibility work, but there is some in there as a just general component of my training, and obviously going through the different movements and doing as full a range of motion as my joint structures will allow. Like it's kind of flexibility work. Like if you do, I don't know, a lying hamstring curl or a seated hamstring curl, and you get to that kind of end range position and it's under load and you're getting stronger there, that is flexibility work.
Yeah.
Like your hamstrings are not going to be tight after doing that, and if they are, you're probably doing it wrong in the first place. But yeah, look, that's kind of the bones of our podcast and stuff. The only thing I want to finish up on is the long-term projections. Like, what do you see in the the next 3 to 5 to 10 years, maybe, in terms of how do you think your game is going to, not necessarily your jiu-jitsu game, but how do you think your overall structure is going to change? Because I think we will in the next episode talk about health stuff and what we do for health and what we would ideally do for health, and then like project that over the next couple of years. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so for me, like, I guess the thing that stands out as a longer term goal really is obviously the jiu-jitsu black belt. Not so much like competing in jiu-jitsu as such. Like I'd like to compete every now and then, but it's not a big priority for me. I want to get better. I want to get my black belt again. Like you say, I don't know, it could be 8 to 10 years. I don't know. Like if I'm, graduating medicine and doing like some medical training, like that's going to take a lot of my time. So, I mightn't be able to commit as much time, but definitely the jiu-jitsu black belt is on the, long-term goal.
And you are
list.
only what, 27?
26.
26. I don't know. I think you're a year older.
Yeah, I'm 26. So like if I get my black belt before 35, like I'll be delighted, because that means I have time to get a red belt as well. Because I think you need to be 40 years black belt.
Something like that.
So 75, I get my red belt. Yes, sir. So yeah, I'll have time to get my red belt. Happy days.
As I plan on living to 120, I probably will as well.
Yeah, definitely as well. Like that's definitely something that's been on my mind recently as well, because of like my family history and the illnesses that are in my family and stuff, and obviously my own.
We can talk about that.
Yeah, and that's something that's like for the next episode. But as I get older now, at 26, I'm definitely thinking more about, right, how can I preserve my health going into my later years and stuff. And obviously my later years,
my 30s.
I mean like, in my 70s and 80s, etc. And I think, obviously building ungodly amounts of wealth is probably priority number one, because if you look at like predictors of mortality risk, like poverty is probably one of the highest ones. So
and education status, and you're becoming a doctor.
Yeah, so that's the main thing really. So we'll talk all in the next episode about how you can accumulate ungodly amounts of wealth in order to plan. No, in all seriousness, we'll leave it on that kind of cliffhanger, that like health is definitely something that I view as the long-term goal, along with the black belt. Anything else that comes is a bonus. Like I definitely want to get 140 kilo bench press, just because, getting three wheels on the bench is legit. So that's probably the only thing I care about getting. I've hit my deadlift and squat targets. I'm not too concerned about getting them heavier, but the bench, you got to get that 3-wheel bench.
I did a 140 incline bench and then shit myself.
Nice.
Not actually, but lowered it nice, under control. Beautiful. I was like, fuck, I'm actually going to get this. Hips shot up, everything. No, it was not good.
Nice. But yeah, I don't think there's anything else other than that really. I'll definitely do like a marathon and probably like an ultra marathon at some point, but I'm kind of saving those things for like my later years. When I'm in my 40s and 50s, I'll probably do like some mad endurance stuff, run over mountains and stuff like that, just because why not? Like endurance is preserved really well into your later years. So I'll probably exploit that stuff when it comes to it too.
Yeah, but you're going to be on TRT and everything. So.
Yeah, once I'm done having kids, like I'll be on TRT and then I'll get my 4-plate bench. But I'm kind of thinking these as my pre-TRT goals.
Oh yeah. Pre and post USADA, is it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Anyway, look, I have nothing else to say. We're going to a science museum, so see you later, guys.
We'll just cut it. You know where to find us.
Yeah, all the stuff, the usual. We have coaching spaces.
Love you lots.
Goodbye.